This is the new Toyota Land Cruiser, which was revealed this morning in the United States as the next generation Prado-sized product in the Toyota Land Cruiser family. And now that this vehicle has been revealed, it's clear to us that this is the basis of the next generation Toyota Land Cruiser Prado, which will come here to Australia and to many other markets around the world. So what do we know about it? With so many different Land Cruiser products floating around over the last few years, I want to start out with the most important thing about this new product, and that is the size. How big is the vehicle that we're looking at right here? Well, in terms of length, this new US market Land Cruiser, the next Prado, is 4,920 millimeters in length. That's about 95 mil longer than an outgoing Prado when equipped with the flat tailgate package. And this new one also has the flat tailgate. In terms of width, we only know the measurement with mirrors, which is 2,140 mils, so slightly narrower, we think, than the outgoing Prado, but only by a very small amount. In terms of height, it's a little bit shorter than the 300 series, but almost identical to the outgoing Prado, and I'll pop these dimensions up on screen for you now. And in terms of the wheelbase, well, it's on the 2,850 millimeter wheelbase of the 300 series, and that's because these two share Toyota's TNGA-F body-on-frame platform, their latest frame platform, which is more rigid than the outgoing Prado's platform. And also that 2850 millimeter wheelbase is what Toyota calls the magic wheelbase. It thinks it perfectly suits an off-roading vehicle. Ergo, I think it's very fair to say that this is the next generation Land Cruiser Prado, perhaps with a few changes for the Australian market and other markets around the world, but the size speaks for itself. This car slots in perfectly beneath the 300 series for a local Australian lineup. Next up, the next controversial question, the name. Well, the name of this car, which is the US market Toyota Land Cruiser, would be a little bit confusing, I think, for people watching in Australia, because here we do have the full fat 300 series Land Cruiser, which is just badged Land Cruiser, and we also have the 70 series, which has continued on for a very long time. But in America, neither of these cars exist. The Americans did not get the 300 series, they haven't got the 70 series, so that's why this vehicle is just going to be called the Land Cruiser to trade on that reputation. But what will it be called in Australia? Well, I've seen some people suggesting that Australia will not get the Prado name. Personally, I can't see that happening. I think Prado is way too familiar to Australian buyers, and I'd be really surprised if Toyota chose to throw away all the brand capital in the name Prado to sit beneath the 300 series. So I personally think this car will wear Prado badges when it gets here, but hey, I could still be surprised. Next, let's move on to the coolest part of this new product, the styling, which I think looks fantastic. But first, well, I don't want to burst any bubbles, but I do want to advise some caution about thinking about what the next Prado for Australia is going to look like. Now, these pictures of the US market Land Cruiser show a really cool, deeply retro styling package, particularly at the front end. And I do think we will see this in Australia on some Prado models, but not the entire range. Now, in the US, there's only two variants of the Land Cruiser. There is also a first edition, which is a very limited spec that sits at the top of the range for a little while. But with only two variants, and with the Land Cruiser being pitched as more of a premium Toyota product in America, there's just not the sales volume to support lots of different designs. The Land Cruiser and the Prado are a much bigger deal in Australia than they are typically in the US. So I think here in Australia, we will see a retro-styled Prado that looks a lot like this American car, perhaps on a GR Sport trim, perhaps on a Kakadu or a VX, maybe. But I reckon we will also see a more basic workhorse front end for variants like the GX and the GXL, which just aren't sold in America, but are super essential here in Australia, where the Prado is not only a fairly desirable privately bought family vehicle, but it also does a lot of police, government, fleet, mining, and other heavy duty work where much more basic specifications are required. So it wouldn't surprise me if in Australia, it's a bit like the Land Cruiser 300, where there's two very different front ends. There's kind of the conventional front end, which on the 300 series features from the GX through to the Sahara with varying degrees of chrome or plastic. And then there's the retro front end, which the 300 series gets on the GR Sport. It wouldn't surprise me if we see something very similar for the Prado. What will that look like? Well, we don't really know yet, because all we've seen is the American car, and all they get is the retro front end. What's also obvious about the styling of this next generation Prado product is how closely related it is to the Lexus GX. Now, over in America, the GX has always been the luxury equivalent to the Prado, and in the past, the Yanks have only gotten the GX and not the Prado. Now it looks like they're going to get both, being called the Land Cruiser and the Lexus GX. But Australia is also getting both. The Lexus GX is coming to Australia, which is very exciting. But comparing some front and rear 3/4 of this next generation Prado sized vehicle and the GX shows just how much these two Toyota motor vehicles share. Certainly the roof, the glass house, and the entire tailgate, to name three of the big parts, although it does look to me like the bonnet is actually different. Look at where it meets the grille on the Prado versus the GX, so that looks like a unique piece. But there are loads of actual physical parts and loads of hard points that you can't see that are shared between these two vehicles. But whereas I think Lexus goes for that sort of luxury interpretation of ruggedness, which does look good, by the way, in my opinion, the Toyota goes after a bit more of an honest specification, and I think it just looks absolutely fantastic. I reckon this new vehicle is a home run in terms of styling for Toyota. You can let me know what you think down below. But basically, I think this new generation Prado product, especially with this retro styling, is a big step forward on the relatively sort of inoffensive, quite bland look of the outgoing Prado, which definitely appealed very broadly because it didn't try and offend anybody. But I reckon the new Prado takes a few more risks. Not everybody is going to love it, that's for sure. But I think that for those who find this sort of blocky, squared off, rugged styling appealing, I think the new Prado is going to be quite desirable indeed. And again, I would really love to hear your feedback. I also sincerely hope that Australian buyers are given the option of a retro styling package. Now, I think it will happen, but I mean, how good does this Land Cruiser trim level look from the US in handsome heritage blue paint with these nice looking grey alloys and that really honest, rugged looking front end? I reckon the detailing is spot on, and I would love to see a spec just like this here in Australia. Now, under the skin, don't be worried that the Prado has become a car-based SUV or gone soft, because it definitely hasn't. It shares the TNGA-F body-on-frame platform with the 300 series Land Cruiser, but also with a bunch of other products, including the US market Toyota Tacoma and Tundra pickups, and the US market Toyota Sequoia, and we even think the next Hilux will sit on TNGA-F, which would be a big upgrade for that car, because this is a very sophisticated platform, because obviously it does have to underpin the 300 series and the Lexus LX, which are more high-end and much more expensive products than the Prado type vehicle. Now, while the front suspension continues to be double wishbone and there is a multi-link setup at the back, this is a frame platform and we know a little bit about it. We think the approach angle has improved to 31 degrees. The breakover angle is 25 degrees, but it looks like the departure angle might be the only one to go a little bit backwards at 22 degrees, while ground clearance is 220 millimeters. Now, there's been no mention of EKDSS in the American specification of this vehicle, but crawl control is available and there is a standard 2-speed transfer case, and you can also see the controls for that in the images of the interior. And I'll come back to the interior in just a moment, because the next controversial point that I want to go to is what's under the bonnet, which for the US is a turbocharged petrol electric hybrid 4-cylinder, a 2.4 litre 4-cylinder engine. This engine is already available in Australia in the Lexus RX 500H, and it's going to become a common sight in a bunch of heavier duty Toyota products over the next several years, because this is the engine that Toyota is using to replace a whole bunch of V6s. And in this case, the classical American engine for a vehicle like this would probably have been a V6 petrol, and in fact you could get a 4-litre V6 petrol Prado in Australia up until maybe 5 years ago, and so this petrol electric hybrid is sort of a replacement for that car. Now, it's a parallel hybrid and it makes 243 kilowatts of power and 630 newton meters of torque with the two systems working together, and those are pretty good numbers, certainly up on the 150 kilowatts and 500 newton meters produced by the outgoing Prado's 2.8 litre turbo 4-cylinder diesel here in Australia. But there is an Achilles heel to the turbo hybrid for the Americans, and that's towing, which is capped at just over 2,700 kilograms braked for the US market. Could that be improved for Australia? Maybe, we'll have to see. But I do think that Australian buyers will be offered the choice of this iForce Max petrol electric or turbo petrol electric hybrid system, maybe even from launch. However, other rumors have suggested the 2.8 litre turbo diesel will continue to be on the menu, and I'd be shocked if that wasn't the case. Maybe it will get a bit of a performance bump from its current outputs, and we do think there's a chance of a non-hybrid version of the 2.4 litre turbo petrol making around 200 kilowatts also being offered to Australian buyers. Now let's go inside the next generation US market Land Cruiser, the vehicle which will form the basis of the next Prado, and I think this is a really impressive interior. It's clearly a development on the thinking behind the interior of the 300 series Land Cruiser, but with the benefit of a couple of more years of development, and also clearly an intention that the Prado is probably pitched to a slightly younger demographic than the 300 series, which explains a little bit more of the fact that it moves away from some of the conservatism of the 300 series interior, which is very much designed to ease the transition for owners of the 200 into the 300. For what it's worth, I do also like the 300 series cabin, but I love that a couple more risks have been taken here in the Prado, including with that like extremely honest, blocky looking dashboard, which incorporates a driver's digital display, but also a big 12.3-inch touchscreen in the center, which runs the latest version of Toyota's infotainment system. So we can expect wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, plus a bunch of connected services features like live navigation as well, plus interaction with an app for the car. A JBL 14-speaker premium stereo will be available on high-end versions of the new Prado. And this particular version that we're looking at here is like the top spec from America, and that's why it has these sort of vintage brown leather chairs, which I think look really cool. They've got a nice contrast stitch to them, and they're also electrically adjustable with memory, and they have heating and cooling. But in a nice little surprise, we have been given a look today at a more basic version of a Prado interior, and that's the 1958 specification from America. Now, it has manually adjusted grey fabric seats, and I expect we'll see something like this in low-end versions of the Prado, maybe the GX or GXL without the leather package here in Australia. What else can I tell you about the interior? Well, there's loads of physical controls. While the screens certainly look modern and up to date, you still have a big old volume knob actually positioned a little bit unusually between the two screens. And then you'll see there's a big row of climate controls, physical climate controls below the screen, and then lots of clear physical controls for the 2-speed transfer case and also for the locking rear and center differentials. You can spot those buttons here on the interior that we've seen today. So that was our first look at the next generation Toyota Land Cruiser Prado, which is going to debut first in America as just the Toyota Land Cruiser, as the only Land Cruiser product that US buyers will be offered. So has this fired you up? Has this gotten you excited for the next Prado? I'm very keen to know all of your opinions, so please let us know down below in the comments. While you're there, if you haven't subscribed, please do so if you found this video valuable. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when we do upload a new video. And as always, thank you for watching Chasing Cars.